Hey everyone, welcome to the Forever Young podcast, where we meet with anti-aging, longevity, and regen industry experts to unlock the secrets of staying forever young. This podcast is sponsored by Harper Media. If you're interested in our solutions to grow and scale your business and stand out strong against your competitors, comment growth in the comments section or visit our website at theharpermedia.com. Now, let's start the show. Today, I'm joined by Bob Harman, the founder of Personalized Stem Cells, a true blazer in regenerative medicine. We'll explore how his innovative work with stem cell therapies is revolutionizing anti-aging and wellness. Bob, welcome to our show. And thank you for being here. So, can you tell us what you did before you started the business and what sparked your interest in the anti-aging and longevity industry?
Absolutely. So I'm a veterinarian, go figure, right? But animals age just like people age. And I got started more than 23 years ago, after having worked with companies in the regenerative medicine field. I got started in veterinary, and we were allowed to move forward faster. It was during the time with all the argument about embryonic stem cells. We didn't do any of that. The patient was their own donor. And for the last 23 years, we have been providing treatments to dogs, cats, horses, and a whole array, 60 different species, including I got to treat a northern white rhino, condors, the SeaWorld, orcas, and dolphins. We all heal the same. And it was a huge benefit to be able to see this in the veterinary world across all these species and all these different diseases, from arthritis to aging and frailty problems. And so it was a privilege to be able to provide all these treatments for veterinarians all over North America and to collect this data and understand how these cells really are working. So that was the backstory.
That's amazing that you've been able to work with so many animals, and I think of veterinarians, I think there's work with cats, dogs, and maybe a few rabbits, but sounds like you work with them all. So that's really cool.
Yeah, it was very cool, but also to be able to see how all these different kinds of species all heal. Like, who would think a sea turtle from Florida and a condor from California, and a human in between, and the dogs, cats, and fish all have this same really interesting cell, this stem cell that we call stem cells, that are a healing cell, and they all have them, and they all look really similar, and they all behave similar. So for all of the eons of development of all these different species, we've all evolved to use the same method of healing and repair and regeneration.
Now, I know it took a while for the use of stem cells to catch up to human trials and human use. Did you find that you had more freedom to explore what stem cell therapy could do with animals more so than you had with humans?
We did, but not necessarily because the regulations are lax. We started with the patient as their own donor of their stem cells. Hayden, if you have a dog, you might have a dog, you might have a cat.
I do.
Yeah, that they carry around with them. I always say you are the solution. You carry your own healing cells. Just sometimes the body needs help concentrating those and getting them there. So we started using a patient's own cells. We went to the Center for Veterinary Medicine at the FDA, which regulates us, and said, we're using a patient's own cells, and all we do is we extract them. Sometimes we multiply them so we have more, and we store them for when the patient needs them. And I think they were very enlightened and allowed us to do that very early on. We provided data back. So we weren't skirting the rules. We were doing it, but doing it, I think, in a manner that was really ethical and according to the regulations. And so we were able to get all this data. We have 15 publications, blinded placebo-controlled studies, and yes, dogs can have a placebo effect when you treat because their owners can influence them. And so we had a chance to do real studies, but also gather real world data from dogs with arthritis and immune diseases and many diseases that are the same that we get as humans. And so we were able to understand that really well from that basis of real world data.
How did you start and grow your business into the success that it is today?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting question, and this is my 5th business. So I've had 4 exits already. Hopefully, I have 1 more, and I've used each one to grow to the next one. So the experience we gained in the veterinary business really helped me understand the consumer, how to set up a business, how to raise money, how to build infrastructure, because You always need money, time, and more money and more time and more money and more time. And so how do you run a business? I learned that in the veterinary business. And then when we moved into personalized stem cells, the human version of what we do, we had a gigantic advantage. I call it completely unfair advantage. All of this veterinary data we took to the FDA, the human FDA, the Center for Biologics, and we said, hey, we have 20 years worth of data in real animals with real diseases, not mice in a laboratory with a fake disease trying to see if something would work. This is real translational medicine. And so how many times, Hayden, have you heard in your lifetime, we cured cancer? Well, you find out they cured cancer in a rat. But then when they tried to go into people, it was either toxic, didn't work like they thought, and lots of companies go out of business. To get into a first treatment of a person would take normally all the biopharma companies here in my backyard in San Diego, takes them 5 to 15 years and probably $50 million, sometimes more, to get to the first single patient you treat, human patient. All of that work in mice and rats and laboratory. We submitted all our data to the FDA in January of 2019. In July of 2019, we launched our first human clinical trial. Took the FDA a little while to look at our data because they're not used to seeing this veterinary huge wealth of data. And when they looked at it, they said, you guys have real animals with real arthritis, just like in people, and you've already shown safety, you've already shown it works. Yes, you can move ahead directly into a human clinical trial. So it saved me raising huge amounts of money, many, many millions of dollars, and all of that time. And so I was able to use the structure in VetStem, including my financial people, my marketing people, all the structure I already had. So when I launched personalized stem cells, it was nearly and still is nearly a virtual company using all the support from its sister veterinary company. It's an unusual combination, but not without precedent. All the big pharma companies all have a veterinary division and a human division. They just don't talk to each other, which is another bizarre question. We talk, we have the same people, we use manufacturing resources that are the same. They're two separate businesses. Obviously, we do different manufacturing for human cells and veterinary cells, but all of the learning all came to rest and we were able to move forward much faster.
Do you think the fact that you treated so many different animals, did that help inform the way that you use medicine for humans and the process that the FDA of getting approved?
Exactly right, Hayden. Exactly right. It entirely formed our opinion. We wrote the protocol knowing exactly what we expected to happen. And literally within a few percentage points, the success rates and the safety in our human study was exactly as we predicted it. And so we've shown the model using veterinary data actually helps you move faster, but it helps you predict. And it also helps you with safety. You really know how these cells work. 20,000 treatments. I know how these cells work in all these different species. So it was not a surprise that that we were successful in our first knee arthritis trial in humans.
So, with your business, Bob, what were some of the challenges that you faced in growing and scaling, and what are some of the biggest challenges you face now?
So, and as it money always is the big challenge. The other one, which is huge, is people. So maybe someday we'll all have robots and that'll be everything, but I don't think so.
Going there. It's actually going there.
So it appears, Hayden, but I'm telling you from having been around this a long time, I was a computer programmer in college in the 1970s. Time ago.
Or engineer right now. Also, it's cool to meet someone else that was in tech.
I started there because we wanted to collect good data in studies when I was still a veterinary student. And so I learned to program on Radio Shack Model 1 and Apple. And I wrote some of the first software that used, we just called it machine learning back then. You know, it's still machine learning, but now they've made it sexy by calling it artificial intelligence. But it's a great tool. You know, it is a great tool. But people are critical and we'll continue to automate. Well, if you were ever to come and visit our laboratories and see how we manufacture and handle cells, it's very hands-on. There's a lot of rules and regulations. These are the people in the bunny suits. If you're a tech guy, you've seen them same thing when they do make chips for computers. You know, we're in these bunny suits, things sterile, and it's still very, very, you have to have good people. Even if we get robots for those kinds of things and we automate manufacturing, still the medical knowledge, the logic, using machine learning with you, I think there's still going to be, it's still a huge need in businesses like ours to have the right people with history. My head of manufacturing for our stem cells, 30 years experience making cell therapy products that are in the market today. And so, he brought all that learning, was able to teach people. So yeah, it will help for sure. But for me, the biggest problem in scaling was having enough money, but then being able to find the right people to do the appropriate, important jobs.
Regenerative therapies you can use with stem cell banking.
So Hayden, I'll use the name of your podcast, Forever Young. So that is what stem cell banking is about. Whatever age you are now, whether you're 10, 30, or 80, your cells are that age, right? If you bank them and they're collected, purified, and frozen in liquid nitrogen, which means minus 180 degrees, so ultra, ultra cold, they essentially go into suspended animation. And then 10 years later, they are still at their original age when you froze them. So they are forever young, whatever age you froze them at. So if you freeze them when you're really young, they're really young. We'll talk later maybe about, what does that really matter? And what happens when you're older? Do you still have stem cells and do they still work? But that's stem cell banking is you have a collection and everybody's heard of banking cord blood. Cord blood only has the kinds of stem cells really mostly to repair your bone marrow after you have chemotherapy, not for a lot of other things, but it's the same thing. You take those, you harvest them, you process them, and you freeze them. We use fat. Fat is beautiful. Fat is lovely. Fat is full of stem cells more than any other tissue in your whole body. And so, although we started out looking at bone marrow and umbilical cords and other things, we moved very quickly to using fat tissue because it's a renewable natural resource. You can take it, it grows back, and cells are in there and they're stored kind of like energy. They're stored for your lifetime and they stay really young in the fat. Not true in other places in your body, like even in your bone marrow. They don't really stay young, they age. But in fat, they stay pretty young. And so it's a resource that anytime in your life you could pull. Why would anybody bank then? If you've carried around, you could use it later because you might have damage, including getting cancer, having chemotherapy, other things that would damage your stem cell population, then you can't use it. So, or you might have a nasty infection. We all just went through COVID, right? So that was unknown before it came along. Then all of a sudden it's there. People have infections all over their body. And so you might contaminate your cells. So having them stored and ready for now and for the future is really our mantra.
So that's actually the first time I've heard about fat being used for anything good. So that's really cool to know.
Yeah, it was discovered by the plastic surgeons. You might guess. So they do plastic surgery where they do facelifts and they move fat around. The really, really observant doctors saw that where they put just fat in under the skin, like to puff up your cheeks or for breast augmentation, the skin there near where that fat was started to rejuvenate. And hey, there's something magic in fat. What is that? And in 1998, the folks at University of Pittsburgh and the medical school plastic surgery group discovered and filed patents around this new cell that nobody knew existed before 1998. It's a recent discovery. Everybody thought stem cells were only in the bone marrow or in cords. But now we know they're around the body, but fat's really concentrated, 500 times more concentrated than bone marrow. Go figure. Nobody knew that in the 70s, 80s, and 90s when they were looking at bone marrow, and then the cell was discovered. And so really probably half of the regenerative medicine companies in the world working on various diseases are using stem cells from fat because it's easy to get. And we have a philosophy about banking your own cells and having your own cells. Your own cells, your own DNA, not somebody else's disease that they might have that we don't even know about. And so we sort of staked our reputation on being in the, you have your own cells, you are the source of healing. We're just your laboratory assistant in helping get those cells so that your doctor can inject them or use them for all kinds of various uses.
What are the most common uses for the regenerative therapies and cells?
Yeah. So probably orthopedics is number one. So there's lots of illegal cell therapy going on. If you go to the FDA's website, it'll tell you how many illegal companies. Typically, True stem cell therapy is not legal to do in the US yet, but yet there are people that will sell you stuff from a placenta they got at a hospital and did in their own little lab. It's totally illegal and dangerous. There was a group here in San Diego that got treated with those kinds of cells, got E. coli infection, and 11 people ended up in the hospital. So it needs to come from a legitimate source. If it's you, it's your own source, there are some options. But the uses that you see in the literature and published and released are the big part is in orthopedics, pain. So shoulders. I had my shoulder treated, actually. I had a rotator cuff tear. So shoulders, knees, hips, now more backs. There's a huge amount of research going on around neurologic diseases, all the ones you hear about, Alzheimer's, Lou Gehrig's disease, all kinds of nerve and neurologic diseases, even just dementia. So there's a lot of work going on. None of that's approved anywhere in the world. There's no approval. So if you're going to an offshore clinic someplace in the Caribbean or in South America, there's no proof of that yet. And they're selling hope, not good science. And so the uses that we think are going to come first will be orthopedic because it's straightforward. We have a huge amount of data, probably 80% of all the data we did in VetStem was with orthopedics. What does everybody want? Forever young. Everybody wants longevity. Here, give me my IV of stem cells and make me young again. Ken, they're selling hope. We're learning the science behind that, and these cells help repair and regenerate for sure. But the idea that you can go down, downtown LA and find some little shop that says stem cells and get your IV injections and become young is not true and very dangerous. So having your cells stored as we learn this is part of why banking goes with therapy. You've got them banked, you've got them safe, you can multiply them. From one little liposuction, you look pretty thin. You're probably an athlete, but I could get like a couple teaspoons of fat and I can make you 500 doses of stem cells for your life to use later in your life or now if you have an orthopedic problem. And so now what is legal for us is if you have a patient that has a serious and debilitating, particularly orthopedic problem, and the orthopedic surgeon says your only option is completely replacing your hip, and they may be too old, they don't want to do that, that qualifies under what you've probably heard of called compassionate use. It's the Federal Right to Try Act. So it's not just for somebody dying of cancer. It's somebody that's tried approved therapies, not working. They're in pain. They're in chronic pain. They're debilitated. They and their physician can ask us for permission to do this, and we have to agree that it's reasonable. And then that patient goes to a plastic surgeon or a physician that does this little small collection of fat, comes to our lab here in San Diego. We process it. We test it, we multiply it so we have multiple doses, and then those doses can be shipped back to the patient's physician to inject typically in a joint, a tendon, a ligament, a muscle tear, maybe a bad scar. Right now, those are the things that really qualify and that we do under this Federal Right to Try Act. So that's legal. Congress passed that in 2018, but most of what you see driving up and down the road and you see the billboard that says regenerative medicine, it's probably either not stem cells, it's something else. And if you'd like to talk about what other things might be classified as regenerative, or it's illegal and the physician and the patient are at risk.
So it sounds like stem cell banking and the therapies it's used for is more for functional medicine and not so much aesthetics.
Yes. So there's a lot of fat transfer for aesthetics. And in there, there's some of those stem cells. So they're getting some of the benefit of stem cells in aesthetics. But just to go in and get aesthetic use of this kind of an isolated stem cell product is not legal in the US.
Okay. And you talked a bit about, different countries doing this maybe in a way that's not so legal. It makes me think of the different peptide business owners that I've had on the podcast and how they talked about how the FDA generally approves something for one use, but if you the other countries, the same thing will get approved for multiple uses. Is the same thing with stem cell therapy?
Yeah. Once stem cells are like, if we get our stem cells approved in the next couple of years, which we hope for knee arthritis, then a doctor can use them for other things off label. Most of the drugs being used are used, quote, off label, but it's already gone through safety testing and been approved. These things I'm talking about, this is not off label use. There are no peptides approved for the kinds of things people are using them for today. They're buying from research grade and then they're selling them to people like it's legal to do, and it's not legal to do. I guarantee you. 40 years in regulatory medicine looking at that. And, if somebody's telling you you can take these kinds of peptides, well, they're manufactured and they're sold If you read on there, they're sold for research use only, research grade only. They're not sold for these various, and the same thing's true with a lot of products out there, placental products, amnion products that people are selling, saying they're a fountain of youth and they'll make you more youthful. They're really not approved. So once we get them approved here, it'll be used broader. So if you come in and you have another use for the same stem cell that we produce, your doctor then can look at the safety data, look at the published data, and decide if you would benefit from this kind of therapy. But it's already been safety tested. Most of the peptide use, there's no safety data at all. So they say, oh, it's just peptides, it's safe. Not necessarily true.
So when you're preserving your stem cells, when is a good age to start? Should you do it in your 20s or can you still preserve them in your 30s and 40s?
So yes, yes, and yes, and older. So better, younger, but more better before something else happens. Somebody that gets AIDS, for example, heaven forbid.
Well, like that doesn't happen much anymore though, since they
No, but
really.
tell me how many people got COVID. Tell me people that have gotten hepatitis. How many people have gotten or are gonna get bird flu? This stuff comes along every 10 years and we have we have a new pathogen we have to worry about. So storing your cells younger is better because then you've got them in their youngest state. We've taken fat tissue in our clinical studies from a 92-year-old gentleman here in Southern California. His cells were perfectly fine. Were they more aged than his cells would have been at 70? Yes, but not by a lot because again, they hang out in fat and they're kind of preserved. So if somebody's 50 and they go, "Oh man, I'm too old to get my cells, they won't work," it's totally not true. Because in our clinical trial, we had 40 patients in our FDA trial. The average age was 65, and we used each person's own cells for them. And so we've gotten a lot of ability to look at those. As you might have guessed, we also did in veterinary. I've treated 19-year-old cats and 16-year-old dogs and old horses with their own cells. So if you treat them right, you can do that. So yeah, banking earlier always a better idea. Also, if you go in for some other surgery and there's fat right there, that can be stored. Fairly young, get a cruciate ligament tear in their knee, so an ACL. And when you go in there with the scope to repair that, there's a beautiful little fat pad that's in the way. They throw it away because it's in their way for repairing the ligament in there. That can be sent to the lab, and now you've got your cells banked for the future without even to have a collection. It's right there.
Okay. This might be kind of a silly question, but I wonder for somebody that might exercise a lot and they burn a lot of fat, does that mean that the cells that they have in their fat would be younger? They wouldn't hang out for as long?
No, but here's what it does mean. Somebody that exercises a lot, the fat goes away, but the cells stay there. And so they're more concentrated. Yeah, I've now seen it in people, but in fact, you might guess we did racehorses, right? Being in the horse and dog and cat business and all the exotics. The very best.
I'm curious, are you comfortable with talking about the different price points and options that you have for stem cell banking?
Sure. Our stem cells, again, we're still investigational. We're going through the FDA. So we can't charge and make money as a commercial business until we finish our FDA. Well, what we can do is charge our cost. And so the average cost per dose that we make for patients about $2,500. But you have to make a batch of them. You can't just make one dose. And so they will be in the cost range total, including their doctor fee to get the fat and their doctor fee to do their diagnosis and their injections in their joints or their back, under image guided, will be somewhere between $20 and $30,000 altogether. But yeah, now you've got them. The second time you get treated, you've already invested, you've banked that. And so now it costs you a few $1,000s to do a retreatment in a year. Let's say you've got a bad shoulder and then, you tear your ACL and you have another, you start to get arthritis and you want to get treated in your knee, then it's way cheaper. So people have to look at this. This is an investment over years, but there's an upfront investment. If you go and get donor cells from somebody else or from a placenta, a birth tissue, you're going to pay $30,000 every time you get injected. If you go to Panama, you go to Costa Rica, you go to the Caribbean, someplace else, You got to pay that every time. And then you also run the risk you're getting somebody else's DNA and risk you might get an infectious, particularly viruses are the biggest risk.
Do you offer payment plans or accept insurance?
So no insurance is accepted yet for any stem cell stuff. So the insurance companies will when it gets further down the line, I am sure, because it's cheaper. The cost to do some repeat treatments on a knee instead of get a knee replacement for $50,000, insurance companies, I think, will then come step in line. But right now, it's a cash business.
The stigma around stem cells. So I remember when I was a kid, cell research was just coming out, and a lot of people, especially religious groups, were really frustrated with it, and I didn't understand why. Do you know where that stigma comes from, and does it still exist today?
Yeah, so we knew in the 1980s that there were stem cells in bone marrow, but they were hard to extract and not very many of them. And during that time period is when we made the first discoveries that in an embryo, so sperm, egg come together, make an embryo, little baby growing, early stage. There's a little group of cells inside that little starting to be a baby that are these embryonic stem cells. So they are really the earliest stem cell. Those are meant to make a whole baby, right? A whole organism. And they would extract those out. They learned how to culture them. They learned how to grow them. And there was discussion about then using those therapeutically. Well, it turns out, but so then the argument became religious, right, and ethical. Can you kill that little budding baby? It's the argument about is it a baby yet or is it not, and abortion.
They care a lot about unborn babies. They're like really obsessed with.
Yeah, and so you go, okay, so is that ethical to do that? So it turns out that wasn't the right question. That is an important question, but the cells are not usable for therapy because those cells were meant to make a whole organism. If I took some embryonic stem cells and I injected them in your arm like a vaccination, it would make a tumor.
Ugh.
Not a very good thing. Also, you get rejection problems, and so they're really good from a research standpoint, and for 30 years, we've been trying to figure out how to make them safe to use them for treatment, but in the middle of all that, that's when Bush 1 said, "Nope, no human embryonic research, no research on those cells except for the ones that are already in research," and there were a few cell lines, and so everybody started raising money because they thought that was the holy grail. Turns out not so. And again, so research tool, and it's used as a research tool. But these adult stem cells, meaning anything from the time you're born till the time you die, in your fat, in your bone marrow, your skin, your hair, you can tell I don't have any stem cells in my scalp, and that is true because as we get older, you get fewer and fewer stem cells hanging out in your body, and so your ability to repair is not as good. Kids repair really quickly, right? Because they have high concentration of stem cells. All we do is as you age, we're able to then to take those, not just bank them, but multiply them from a million cells in the first collection to hundreds of millions to billions of cells, freeze them down, and then be able to use them later when you need more cells or you have some serious injury. We did a really nice study in the middle of COVID showing these stem cells, if you take and give them intravenously, will kill the virus, reduce all the inflammation, and certainly reduce the death loss.
Wow. So another thing I'm curious about is where the US really stands in terms of stem cell therapies and banking. Are we behind in it versus other countries? Are we forward in it? And why do people leave the country to get these therapies elsewhere?
Yeah. Well, first of all, banking here is not FDA regulated per se, and it's legal. So if somebody came to us and they said, "I just want to bank my cells. I don't want to make my cells for the future, but I want to save them now." It's like $2,500. You collect a sample and then you can store them. It's very much like if somebody wanted to store their cord blood when their kid is born. So banking is here now. It's big in the US, it's big globally. We're probably in par with the rest of the world. For the therapeutic approvals, there have been fewer here, more in Japan, South Korea, few more in Europe, although Europe's also slow. The regulators have made some decisions about how to regulate cell therapy, or little like the old drug regulations. Hayden, if I were to collect your fat and build your cell bank for you over here, and then I'd hold your little vial up and say, "Here, this is a drug." That's not a drug. That's my cells. That's me. I'm alive in there. That's my cells. It's mine. And it's true. It's yours. You own them. We don't own them. We're just your manufacturer in your lab. But FDA, because of problems historically, have tried to call that a drug. So they're making us go through the same process as some new cancer drug that's highly toxic and foreign material. I think that's maybe going to change. There's more discussion about a patient's own tissue should be theirs. Like you can move your skin around. You go on a burn wound. That's not FDA regulated. You can even get a kidney transplant. That's not FDA regulated. So organ transplant and skin and cartilage and those, but stem cells, part of the same problem you pointed out of all the controversy around embryonic stem cells, FDA just got scared and they said, these are all drugs. So we're pushing as part of an industry group to say you maybe should license the laboratories to do this so that it's safe, but we've already shown the safety of how we manufacture. You should have access to your cells for things you want to get treated for. Should be patient choice and your doctor that make that choice. We're going down the pathway why that's still the rule and hoping that there gets to be a broader application and use of these. But for approvals in the US for these particular kinds of stem cells, not cell therapy in general, but these kinds of regenerative therapies, literally one just happened 6 months ago, one. And it's for kids with bone marrow transplant reactions to their bone marrow transplant. Very, very narrow market. We're all out there striving to do it right. And that's why everybody's desperate. So they go offshore someplace and take the risk. If they have a serious disease, they're dying of Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS or MS or something else. And so there is a big demand by the public for that. And then, of course, sort of the topic here also is longevity. There's a huge demand for that. It's why peptides are being sold. It's why these illegal.
And what you talked about with people owning the right to their cells and all of that, it actually reminds me of something that I went through. It's kind of off topic, but I was curious about your thoughts on this. So it's probably happened 10 years ago. I got my wisdom teeth removed in New York. And before they started the procedure, they told me that I couldn't keep my tooth. And I didn't want to keep my tooth. I didn't even think about it. But when they told me I couldn't keep it, I wanted to keep it. I didn't understand why I couldn't keep my tooth. Is it the same thing?
Very appropriate question. So when doctors are doing the collections in their plastic surgery office, it's no big deal. But now, let's say your doctor is over at UCLA, and you say, "Hey, I'm collecting my fat because you're doing a little stomach procedure, and I want you to collect my fat." They would go, "Oh, no, no, no. Tissues aren't allowed to go out of the. We can't give you back your own fat." We've developed now a method, and I think maybe the first ones where these centers have looked at. We're a registered California tissue bank. So we're a legal tissue bank. This is like Viacord for kids with cords. Can you imagine a mom's in the hospital having the baby, and then right at the end, after they've already signed up to get the cord collected, the hospital goes, "Nope, we won't let that happen." That's already been pioneered. And so, yes, what they're worried about is if you got an infection from something, a contaminated something, but you got your hip removed, and hey, you wanted to have that. It's yours, right? It's your body. You should be able to have it back. But they're worried about liability, and that's why they probably now teeth. The baby's teeth. Those also have stem cells in there. Not very many, but some people want to try to harvest those. So I think that's been pioneered, but it's an important question, and the doctors need to be educated, and that's part of our job to make sure before we go do a collection someplace that the doctors and the surgery center are all indemnified and they're happy that it's okay. It's true. It's a tissue banking business.
Is that another service that your company offers, collecting tissue from a person's surgery?
Yeah, so we don't actually collect the tissue, but we provide the kit, the instructions, and the transport once the tissue is collected. So I don't have doctors on board except my medical director, and so we don't have surgery centers, but we work with surgery centers all over the U.S., New York, Florida, Midwest, Chicago, where there's somebody already set up to do that. So a patient comes in, we send a beautiful. I should have one here. We send a beautiful little collection kit that will keep the tissue cold for 3 days, even though we send it overnight. And so we participate in that part to get it back to the lab, handle it all, bank it for you, keep you informed. And then you're part of the PSC family where you've got cells stored, and we provide you ongoing information about both your cells and potential uses that are being approved as it goes forward. The same thing happens on the other end. So we've got those cells in these beautiful little vials ready to use. When you now have a need and you're going to get treated, and we've got the paperwork done, we ship it out in a frozen liquid nitrogen shipper that's again less than minus 180 degrees, and it stays frozen up to 7 days. we send it overnight, but if it ever got caught or lost someplace, we got 7 days for that to get to your doctor, and he just pulls it out, and it's you in that little cell, your cells, thaws on the table, puts in a syringe, and puts it in your joint or your wherever you're gonna get treated for that particular kind. Yeah, so it's you frozen forever. They essentially last for sure more than 50 years based on data we already have, but they probably last mostly forever.
All right. Well, I think that covers everything that we wanted to go over today. Thank you for coming on the show and for helping us just dispel all the mysteries of stem cells. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, there are lots of 'em, and if people wanna go look at videos and instructional videos, personalizedStemCells.com is where they can go and look, and there's this whole section in there that has questions and answers. I mean, these same kind of things. What does a cell do once it goes into a joint? What does a cell do when it's injected? How long do they last? What are the risks? Those kind of things. So we have a huge educational component to what we do. We've got a YouTube channel, also here, Personalized Stem Cells, where people can go look at YouTubes on how these things work. And they're not scientific. These are for the average person to be able to look and learn, how does this therapy work? Feel free, you can look at that. You can have a free consultation if you just wanna know about what's the logistics and how does this all work? Because again, we're in the education business now. It's so important that people understand what's legal, what's not, what's safe, what's not, because it's hard to figure out, looking on the internet for sure.
And one thing I actually forgot to ask, you mentioned about can people all across the country sign up for a consultation and get this treatment through your company?
Yeah, essentially any place. You might have to travel a little bit, but from East Coast to Florida to Washington State and Oregon, in the middle of the country, Texas and Louisiana. We've actually got a list of doctors that do this that aren't our employees. They're just affiliate doctors that want to offer this to their patients. And we just facilitate and do the lab work. So you can go on there and look. Also, if somebody has their own physician and they say, I've got Dr. Welby, he's my doctor. I don't want to go to anybody else. It's easy for them to learn if they're experienced in that particular kind of need. It's easy for them to learn. We do the hard part inside the FDA inspected and qualified laboratory. So it makes it easy on the physician.
Okay, good. Thank you again for being
Excellent.
here today.
No problem.
That's all for today's episode of Forever Young, Region Leaders Share Anti-Aging Secrets. Thanks for joining us to uncover the keys to lasting vitality. If you're interested in checking out stem cell-based personalized medicine yourself, visit personalizedstemcells.com. That's personalizedstemcells.com. Don't miss our next episode. Subscribe now on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube, and visit theharpermedia.com to explore how we can help your business grow. Stay vibrant, and we'll catch you next time.